how to combat meeting fatigue and take back control. As we talk to leaders day in and day out, this is one of the biggest stress points. Too many meetings, too much meeting fatigue, Zoom fatigue. So if you'd like to stop feeling exhausted going from a meeting to meeting with no time to do the work, if you're struggling to balance too many priorities, this session is for you. If you want to stop your time from being stolen by unproductive meetings, this session is for you. And if you want to stop feeling overwhelmed, this session is for you. And if you want to actually treat the underlying root cause of your overwhelm, this session is for you. If you want to feel like you're back in control, this session is for you. If you want a proven framework to give you more resilience, this session is for you. By the end of this session, we want you to be able to feel like you're back at the wheel, in control, no matter what life is throwing at you. So we're going to cover a couple of things today. So one, we're going to give you one of the key tools from our Tackling Overwhelm course. We'll show you how to apply that specifically to meeting fatigue and give you a real world result immediately. So many of you are joining today as part of our Leader Reads program. If you're not a member of our Leaders Read program, I'd encourage you to join. It is something we launched in December of 2020. It's books hand-selected by our team that we think are critical reading for leaders. Each month we go through a new book. We provide a growth guide to lead you through the book, provide weekly recap videos of the key concepts as we progress through each book. So even if you don't have time to read the book, but you just want to stay in touch, join Leader Reads. You can go to leaderreads.com and join that. This month, we just wrapped up the book Think Again by Adam Grant. And this is a really powerful book that gets us to rethink and reconsider some of our biases and how we approach what we know, and more importantly, what we don't know. And it's hard to believe that today is September 30th and it's about to start Q4. So for October's book, we actually picked the book Effortless. This is actually one of my favorites. It's probably been the most impactful book in Leader Reads this year as we've kind of gone through it. So we're starting that book tomorrow on October 1st. It's by the author Greg McGowan. You may recognize him. He wrote a New York Times bestseller, Essentialism, a few years back. This book builds on that, and we're actually even thinking about covering essentialism in a future Leader Reads series. But this is all about how to find an easier path, how to make things easier for those who matter most. So this is another really powerful book. Encourage you to join there. I'm going to actually share some insights from both of these books and how it applies to meeting fatigue. So Rethink, or Think Again from Adam Grant. This is all about how to think again or reconsider. So what I'm hoping today is to have you rethink your relationship with meetings. You know, I mentioned this is one of the biggest pain points that we've heard from many leaders. Lots of meetings, Zoom fatigue, too many meetings. This is where I'm going to pull that tool that I mentioned I'd share from you from our Tackling Overwhelm course. It's called a trigger sweep. And what the trigger sweep is just a way of capturing those events and those recurring things that are triggering you emotionally and causing you to be stressed. Those are typically people or recurring actions or behaviors, specific events or topics, or maybe even there's certain words. When you hear a certain word, it just triggers you. The power of the trigger sweep is that you can give the stress a name and get it out of your head. One of my favorite quotes from David Allen, who wrote the book Getting Things Done, is your head is for having ideas, not holding them. we hold so much in our head, and we often give it more weight than it deserves. So as we look at some of these pain points, too many meetings, back-to-back meetings, this is where you can use a tool like the trigger suite to just get these out of your head. I'm sure this is one of many stressors, but getting it out and just putting it down on a piece of paper can make it a little less daunting. It gives us something to look at, to reflect, and maybe make a choice as to how we're going to address that. So many of you either came from social media or you came from our email list. You got here because we identified that pain point of meeting fatigue and needing to take back control. We were writing it down in an email, but this is a tool you can use at any point in time. So when we step back and look at meetings, what I find interesting is what currently happens with most of us around meetings. And that it's Groundhog Day. We tend to do the same thing we did yesterday, the same thing we did a week ago, the same thing we did a month ago. We just accept our current reality. And our current reality is often we've got too many meetings, they're back to back, and we feel like we're taking things from our to-do list. I'll take it from my planner, my to-do list, and move it from today to tomorrow because I had so many meetings, the work is just overflowing from one day to the next. So instead of accepting that current reality, today I want to maybe create a new reality. I'm going to give you a couple strategies to take back control around this meeting fatigue. So strategy number one, I like to call it a buffer. A buffer, it's a space between. If you've ever seen a set of railroad cars moving down the track, there's an actual space that's between them. This is actually called a buffer and chain. This gives enough space that the cars don't collide against one another, cause immense friction. A buffer is one of the most powerful tools when you're looking at combating meeting fatigue. So let's look at what's going on right now with meetings. The pandemic from 2020 into 2021, we've been on lots and lots of meetings. And because of the ability to create a meeting and to pull everyone together, there's no need to physically come together and force some constraints that might have created some natural buffers. We can just schedule a meeting and everybody can join from their home. If they're in the office, maybe they're at their vacation home, they can join and they're expected to join. And so we've ended up with these back-to-back meetings. So what's interesting, Microsoft actually had blame for some of the meeting fatigue, which we'll touch on a little later. Was interesting. They did a study this past year, and they looked at what is the impact of back-to-back meetings. So they took 14 people, and they did an experiment over 2 days, and they were just looking at the impacts of back-to-back meetings and alternate strategies. So they were looking at 4 back-to-back 30-minute meetings. The study did a couple of things. The first was kind of the control group. They set them up on just a typical back-to-back 2-hour block, 30-minute meeting, followed by a 30-minute meeting, followed by a 30-minute meeting, followed by a 30-minute meeting. And actually, some days that actually sounds good to me because I think I have an hour meeting, followed by a 30-minute meeting, followed by a 30-minute meeting, followed by an hour meeting. But they had them go through 4 back-to-back meetings, 30 minutes long. And then on a different day, same respondents, went through another 4 back-to-back meetings with a slight change. They introduced a simple 10-minute break between each meeting, just 10 minutes, a break scheduled between each meeting. and they were asked to do one specific thing. They were asked to, during that break, we would like for you to meditate or listen to Headspace app. And if you aren't familiar with Headspace app, you can go on the Google App Store or the Apple App Store and download this app. I think it's free to kind of get started, but it's a meditation app. So they were asked to just simply listen to a simple meditation for 10 minutes and to do that consistently. What was interesting is the results. So they didn't just base this off of perception. How did you feel after this meeting? They actually added a little more science to it. So during both of these days, all 14 of these respondents were wearing an EEG cap, which was measuring the brain waves, the electrical waves going on during these meetings. And it was interesting. So the top picture, you can see what was happening from the first meeting to the second meeting to the third meeting to the fourth meeting. You can actually see that their activities were different. They were in much higher stressed states going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. Compared to the EEG results in the brain waves during when the 10-minute breaks were happening, which is the second set with the break, they were much more relaxed, much calmer. They felt less stress. So they're actually able to measure the difference between these two different scenarios. And ultimately, there were three big takeaways from this study. The first one is breaks between meetings actually allow the brain to reset. It's almost, if you've ever looked at sleep studies, when you kind of go through different waves during the evening, it gives the ability for the brain to reset. What does this do? It reduces the cumulative buildup of stress from meeting to meeting to meeting. The second big takeaway was back-to-back meetings can actually decrease your ability to focus and engage. When that type of brain activity is being registered, you're stressed. You're more easily going to react to stress. So back-to-back meetings were reducing productivity. While you might have had an effective 2-hour block of meetings, it actually reduced your ability to have focus and engagement and more productive results from those meetings. And the third big takeaway was that transitioning between meetings can be a source of stress, source of high stress. So they were actually right when those transitions, leaving one meeting, going and changing context, going to the other meeting, they were able to measure even higher sources of stress. So this strategy is the buffer. Create an intentional buffer, a break between your meetings. This is going to reduce your stress levels, reduce the fatigue that you're feeling at the end of the day after back-to-back meetings. It's going to break it up. It's going to reduce your stress levels. So I'm curious, maybe in the chat, what are some of the other benefits that you might see from having a buffer? You know, one of the benefits I've seen from having a buffer is it gives me the ability to transition from one meeting to the next meeting more effectively, meaning I can actually have a little bit of time to think about what do I want to accomplish in the next meeting. So it can be a secondary benefit of the buffer. So this buffer can be so powerful. So I want to introduce you to this second strategy. The second strategy I like to call the butcher. The butcher, just like it sounds, is trimming the fat from the meeting. Now there's a couple of ways to approach this. So because one of the things that I get resistance on the buffer is, if anyone's very detail oriented, you'll notice we went from a 2-hour set of meetings to 2 hours of meetings and a half an hour to, depending on if you had a break after the last meeting, 40 minutes of breaks. Now that seems like a potential loss in productivity. Well, one of the ways to get around that, if you're still looking at it from a bean counting, a time counting, is to simply look at reducing the meeting times. So they could happen in the same amount of time, but then just providing the buffer along with the meeting time. There was another Microsoft study that looked at the benefits of improving or shortening meetings, because they found over the last year that remote workers are seeing about a 13% higher volume of meetings. So meetings have been measurably going up. The number of meetings have been going up. And that 50% of employees complain of burnout and less of a work-life balance. So one opportunity is to reduce the size of the meetings. Take your hour-long meetings and consider cutting them to 50 minutes, allowing for that 10-minute buffer, or even 45. Maybe reducing the time of your 30-minute meetings to simply 25. Now, I know we did this internally at Institute Success, and it's probably one of the fastest feedbacks we ever got that, wow, this was better. Everyone on our team said, this is better. Our meetings are shorter. We feel like we're getting more done and we're being a little more focused. So now how to make these shorter, you still got the butcher trim some of the fat. So one of the ways where meetings are ineffective is that the meeting facilitator hasn't set up an agenda. There's not a clear agreement around what are we going to talk about. So setting an agenda in advance can take some of the inefficiencies out of unproductive meetings and really clear, this is what we're going to talk about. We can get started. We've got a clear agenda. We can move forward. You can provide it to them in advance in case they might want to add something. And as the facilitator decide, will this fit in the meeting or not? Is this the appropriate meeting for that new agenda item? You can also move support material to the attendees, let them see it in advance so that they can process it. You know, some of the things I've seen where meetings are unproductive is to sit down and watch people look and read reports at different levels of pace. Could have been done outside of the meeting. Make that meeting more efficient. Having clear meeting titles can set what is the outcome of the meeting. I see meetings where it's Harry with John. What's that meeting about? Being clear on what the purpose of the meeting is so that they can be more efficient. The other thing is to start them on time. Now, granted, this doesn't necessarily make them more efficient, but realizing, and I think this is the healthy part of this in an organization, is having that conversation. Our meeting's actually starting late. We seem to see people trickling in a couple of minutes late. We never start on time. That's usually because of back-to-back meetings. If you can have a healthy conversation, hey, we want to give everybody a buffer, and that buffer could be at the beginning of the hour, it could be at the end of the hour, but deciding when meetings start along with that buffer and starting them on time so that they can ultimately finish on time. So I've seen some organizations that decide to move all of their meetings to 5 minutes after the hour, and some organizations end them. But if you can have an agreement consistently, that's where the power of scale comes in, because now everybody's looking at their meetings from the same perspective. And one more way to kind of trim the fat is just ask really good questions. Do we need to have all of these meetings? Do we have a clear purpose on these meetings? Do we have a clear agenda? some of your meetings might not be necessary. They may have been created out of desire to create connection, to create or fill a void, especially in this last 18 months with all this uncertainty, to make sure we're on the same page. Maybe they're not required anymore. Look at your meetings that you've been invited to. Should you be there? Or could someone let you know the outcome of the meeting? Are you required at all the meetings and just accepting all the meetings? So reducing some of your own meetings you're attending. Looking, if you're the facilitator, are there too many people in the meeting? Are the right people in the meeting? So maybe not all the current invitees are required. Right. And once again, just ask yourself, are you required in that meeting? So the butcher. So what do you see as the benefits of cutting back, reducing some of your meeting times? Has anyone tried this inside of their organization? This breather, I saw a comment in chat that a breather is so important and effective. I saw that. I see some notes about taking notes and scheduling follow-ups. Sometimes the follow-ups need to happen outside the meeting. Some people try to put them into the meeting. Having effective, efficient meetings and reducing that time allows you to have more productive time later in the day. The third strategy is called the block. The block. This is actually starting to create blocks in your schedule. And this is the most counterintuitive piece for some folks. Is we talked about meeting fatigue, and we talked about too many back-to-back meetings, needing a buffer, needing a break. I'm going to actually recommend you schedule more meetings. The complete opposite of what you think would get you out of this hole that we've dug ourselves in. Those meetings are for you. So one of the biggest things I see leaders failing to do is actually scheduling time for themselves. Scheduling your time to get the work done. I hear them complain about, I'm going from meeting to meeting to meeting, I can't ever get the work done. Well, if you step back and put a time block, an agreement with yourself, I'm going to do my work. Whether this is develop a proposal, I'm going to groom our product backlog, I'm going to design our architecture, whatever your work is. One-on-one meetings, this is when they're going to happen. Put intentional time on your calendar. That does two things. That pushes the meetings to the times when you weren't intending to accomplish work. It forces meetings into certain parts of your day that can provide for some more efficiency. It also gives you that time to do the work. It gives visibility to your teammates. That's when I'm working, not when I would like to be interrupted. A great book, if you haven't read it, is Deep Work by Cal Newport. You know, we're in an information age, and we're more and more asked to do very deep, innovative work. And that requires intense, uninterrupted focus. So schedule that time for yourself, block it off, put the buffers on the calendar, put times, a technique I do is I block off time for when I'm going to manage my inbox. I block off time at the beginning of the day. How I'm going to set up my workday. I block off time at the end of the day. I'm going to shut down my workday. I block off time on my calendar for this is when I want to do one-on-one meetings. Now I mark that as free. to allow people to schedule time into it, but I have that visible as that's when I would like for that to happen. I've got times blocked off for client work. I've got my buffers blocked off. Sometimes I've got time blocked off to prepare for a presentation like today or a meeting. But putting intentional time, I'm an advocate, you should make your calendar full and have it with clear intention. It can still be shown as free when you want to allow people to schedule time into your calendar. But don't let your calendar, this is what happens for most leaders, is it's open. If I'm available, schedule time into it. That is unintentional meeting structure that's created. So consider putting blocks for the work that you're responsible for doing on your calendar. Blocks for the meetings, for the people that are most important to you, your team, one-on-one time with your boss, one-on-one time with your direct reports. Meetings are critical. They're the lifeblood. So we need meetings. We're not going to avoid meetings. I wish that's not the goal of this, but to be more intentional about how we do our meetings and how long they are, so that we're ultimately producing the work that we want to do. So that's the block. I'm curious, what do you see? What do you see as some of the benefits of the block? So one block I didn't talk about is having intentional meeting days and having intentional focus day. I'll give you two examples. And this gives you, as I see, clarity of focus. We have at Institute Success meetings Monday. Almost our entire team has large blocks of time that are labeled internal meetings. We don't meet with clients very often on Mondays, and definitely not on Monday mornings. That's a time where we're intentionally focusing on our internal meetings. We're setting them at the beginning of the week. And most of our team actually has Wednesdays or large blocks of Wednesdays, no meetings. That gives everyone the ability to focus and know that we're not going to interrupt one another. So when you start actually having these conversations, not just with yourself, but with your team and your coworkers, this starts to scale very, very powerfully. We have clarity of when we're going to be available, when we're going to meet, immense power with the blocks. So I want to look beyond meetings, because this is not the only source of stress and fatigue. So if we go back to that first example from that study at Microsoft, and we saw these different brain waves, different activities, this increase of stress from a 30-minute meeting to another 30-minute to another, you saw that increase, that buildup of stress. So what's actually happening? So this is timely, because if you're starting Effortless with us tomorrow in Leader Reads, a concept is introduced in chapter 1. And it's the foundation of a lot of what Greg then outlines throughout the book Effortless. It's called Perceptual Load Theory. Now, it's a lot of big words around this thing, but it looks and feels like this. We're all overwhelmed. I know there's days when I'm like, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted. This is perceptual load theory. We're actually processing about 6,000 thoughts a day. If you think about it, we just went into a meeting, maybe with 5, 6, 7 colleagues. We're talking about something intense and we're having these meetings. There's lots of possibilities. We're trying to create clarity, new agreements. There's a lot going on in that meeting. And boom, we go to another meeting. Whole change of context, more thoughts, more things going on. Boom, we go to another meeting. This is creating this overwhelm, this perceptual load theory, because we're not just relaxing, we're having to think very strongly with the prefrontal cortex. This is hard work. We're thinking about new things, new possibilities, and we're really leveraging our brain. But when this load starts happening on us, an interesting thing happens. Our brains start to prioritize things with high affective value. Things like fear, resentment, and anger. That stress causes us to show up differently. It stresses us out. Those back-to-back meetings, too many meetings are a really strong form of stress. But I would venture to guess it's not the only thing that stresses you out. I mean, I'll use myself as a good example. So my wife had to go out of town. She was visiting my daughter at college. She got in late, and I was up early the next morning. I was responsible for getting my daughter off to school. I take her to the bus every morning. But this morning, I'm like, I also had to make sure she had breakfast, and there was just a couple extra things. And I come downstairs, and my middle son is actually cooking breakfast. He's got one egg in the frying pan. I'm like, I can't get into the kitchen to cook Avery breakfast. And so I lost my temper a little bit with my son because that's not what I had planned. And it just kind of cascaded from there. We ended up running a little late. We get to the bus stop. The bus had just pulled out of the lot. New bus driver, new routine. The bus is supposed to pick her up at 7:01. It's 6:59 and the bus is leaving out of the lot. I am chasing this bus to the next stop. That stresses me out. A break in my routine stresses me out. I had a plan. It didn't go accordingly. It can cause stress for me. So that's an example. I'm curious, what else is stressing you? What are some of the stresses beyond meetings that are happening for you? Put those in the chat. Beyond the meetings. I know I get stressed if I get interrupted. If I'm in the middle of trying to focus on something and someone interrupts me, or a group message, if I forgot to turn Do Not Disturb off on my phone while I was focusing, and all of a sudden a group chat message kind of goes off, that can disrupt my focus. I see constant interruptions of Slack and email. Yeah, tools like Slack, they're extremely powerful. If you don't have agreements on how to use them, people can expect you to respond immediately, and it's a constant information overload. I see dealing with COVID and pandemic in relation to work. Yeah, this is an extra stress. You've got kids at home. We've got mask mandates that are back and on, trying to work through what does this mean for the workforce, unexpected drop-ins. These are all stressful things, and they're one of many things. And that's why you can go back and use a tool like the trigger sweep and start identifying those stressors, just as you did in the chat. So as you look at getting these out of your head and onto a piece of paper, I want you to see what you just did. You identified your stressors. Earlier in the example, it was back-to-back meetings, feeling overwhelmed and anxious. That's what was going on for those 14 people, and I'm sure you in back-to-back meetings. You can take this same stress, identify the stressor, identify the desired outcome. I want to feel relaxed and in control going from meeting to meeting. Now, you can paint, this is what I would love, and this is what's going on now. So this is my stressor and this is where I want to be. But that's not enough. If we actually use that study as a simple approach to how we would address this, what actually happened was the buffer. The buffer created space to allow someone to go from a stress state to a relaxed state. That buffer gave a little bit of space. Now, if you remember that picture of the buffer, there was also a chain. The buffer's not enough. What actually happened in that study was that there was an identified disruptor. It wasn't the buffer. You can't just go take a break and expect to go from stressed to relax. You have to know what you're going to do during the buffer that is going to actually reduce that stress and help you, what we would refer to as self-regulate. So that study was really intentional. It didn't give them a choice. It said, meditate for those 10 minutes with the Headspace app. So very, very, very specific. So if you can identify the stressor, identify the outcome, and have an intentional disruptor, this starts to reduce the stress and put you in a more relaxed and controlled. But there was a little bit more, because one of the things about those back-to-back meetings is they realize I'm having a meeting, and I'm going to have another meeting, and I'm going to have another meeting, and I'm going to have another meeting. I was able to identify stressors that are repeating. And it wasn't just the buffer, and it wasn't just the disruptor that made the difference. It was the buffer, it was the disruptor, knowing where you were and where you want to be, but then applying that consistently, applying that disruptor consistently every time. After a meeting, I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes with the Headspace app. Now, it doesn't have to, this is not about meditation. Meditation has been proven to relax and de-stress. It could be breathing, it could be walking. There's a number of disruptors that could happen during this buffer. It just needs to be one that works for you and that you intentionally do consistently. So, very simple recipe. Identify the desired outcome. Identify the stressor. Then identify your desired outcome. Be very specific with a disruptor that's going to help you move from stressed to de-stressed, and then apply that consistently. So here's what we've covered today. I've given you about as much as I can in our brief time together, but I wanted to show you how the trigger sweep hands you an initial tool to bring things back in control. You can apply this to meetings and see how we apply that to meetings to help you peel back and be more effective with your meetings. But that's not addressing the real root cause of the problem. If you want to do that, you need a full suite of tools that are going to give you that consistent application. You can take what we've learned today and apply that. You're going to have better results with your meetings, and it's going to give you some level of stress. But I want to introduce you to something that can take this to another level. So we've covered why you get overwhelmed, the trigger sweep, and how to apply it to meetings. We've got a new program called Tackle Overwhelm and Take Back Control. We are doing this on October 14th. This is going to do a couple of different things. It's going to use an established assessment to give you insight into where your stress builds up and how to take action before it builds up too much. And then we'll walk you through some of our proven toolkits to reduce the stress, give you some immediate actionable results, and give you ultimately a customized plan that you can actually take and apply to bring you back in control. So there's a couple of tools in this. We've talked about the trigger sweep, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. That assessment we referred to is actually called an emotional intelligence or an EQ report. These are personalized to you and where you are on your current level of stress. It makes you aware of some of your stressors that you may not be thinking about, some things that may trigger stress and you haven't been able to verbalize or identify them, and some strategies to overcome some of those stressors. You're actually seeing part of my EQ report here on the screen. So it's a full detailed report to take you through those 5 areas of emotional intelligence and how you can start de-stressing. Then we also introduce you to our stress toolkit. This is going to give you a list of emotional disruptors beyond, meditation. As I mentioned, that's just one disruptor. But then how do you do them intentionally and apply them consistently? We'll introduce to you our emotional control habit formula. It's how you can apply this in a systemic way so that these become habits that become just regular unconscious behavior. You start self-regulating without even thinking about it because you start building a habit that sticks. There's some self-regulation tools that we'll walk you through, some lifestyle steps that you may be aware of, may not be aware of, that can actually give you a foundation of reducing this stress. You get a copy of the digital workbook, a recording of the full live event. So if you want to go back and actually go deeper and post the workshop, you can actually have the full recording of everything we covered, access to all these tools that we uncover. So this is, as I mentioned, it's going to be on October 14th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern. If you go to that page, you're going to notice the price is $7.97. However, if you register between now and next Wednesday, you're going to gain the access to our lowest pricing of $4.97 per person. You just simply have to use the meeting promo code meeting fatigue. So that's just all lowercase meeting fatigue. And that's going to give you the lowest possible price. Now that'll go away after October 6th. And if for any reason, if you attend and you want your money back, you get it. No questions asked. We have a no risk, 100% money back guarantee. The only request is you simply email our support or contact us via phone or support within 30 days. If you do so, we'll give you a full refund, no questions asked, and return every penny back to you. So special pricings till Wednesday. And that's really for those of you that have attended today. So if we were going to incentivize anybody, it's those of you who've taken time out of your day, already overwhelmed, too many meetings, yet you took on one more, so thank you. So we want to incentivize you. We have had some requests to get this recording out to some of the other folks that couldn't make it because they had too many meetings. So we will offer that via the recording. If they watch the recording, they'll hear about that promo as well. So once again, actually, before we go to the Q&A, so if you have questions, please post those in the chat, and we'll kind of have an open Q&A. I just want to touch on one point, and that's your time. What you're doing with your time right now, I imagine, may not be working as effectively as you want. It's not the amount of time that matters so much. is what you do with the time you have. I showed you some strategies. What are you doing intentionally scheduling the time you have? This training is not only going to save you time, it's going to reduce your stress level. You're going to be more present when you're trying to do your best work and be most productive. So please don't think of this as yet more training. You're going to invest a few hours of your time and you're going to leave with a plan of action. So please register, join us. The one question I would ask you before we move on to the Q&A is, what is it going to cost you if you don't regain control back? So let's hop over into our Q&A session and we'll take questions.
Andy, we do. We've got some questions about, you basically, it sounds great, but I just don't know how to commit the time. And it's meeting after meeting. So how do I find the time to even start focusing on myself?
Yeah, this is one of those things where if you can invest the time, this will give you back time. We've shown some strategies today where you can take back some time, reduce your meetings. And, I didn't touch on one point because did anybody think, well, that's great, Andy, but I don't have control of these meetings and I'd love to move them to 45 minutes or I'd love to move them to 25 minutes, but I don't feel like I have that authority. I don't think I have that control. So one of the things is we often lose sight of what we have control of. If you go into your next meeting and it's an hour-long meeting or a 30-minute meeting and you think it could be done in less time, you need that buffer. I'd encourage you to do them at the beginning of the meeting. Hey, I was at this webinar. I think a buffer would do as well, or I really need 10 minutes back. Could we finish this meeting in 45 minutes? You would be surprised. Actually, you'll be encouraged by the other people in the room. Yes, please, can we make this 45 minutes? Can we cut this? There will be other people that will be supporting you. And it just starts with a question. And it's you taking control by having the courage to ask that question. So in terms of, where's this time coming from? I would put that, what control are you going to gain back by giving yourself this time that's going to put you in that, I'll call it the blue state, that less stress state? Are you going to be able to be better at your job, to be a better teammate, to be a better mother, father? What's that going to look like for you? And I think if you're having conversations with your team or your boss, that's a great place to start. Because I don't know of a boss, a leader, a teammate that wouldn't want that for you. You just
another one we gotten, I just got was, I've tried setting meeting agendas before. It doesn't work in my company. So what makes this unique or different?
Is there any clarity for what didn't work?
No clarity in that one, but I think, what I've heard from other people is, that people go off course or they don't really come prepared. How can I set that agenda and get people to stick to it?
Yeah, so we have a meeting actually agenda template. And so there's a couple key pieces of it that go overlooked. One of the critical pieces of a meeting agenda template is who's the facilitator. If someone's not identified as in control of the meeting and they're not controlling the meeting, they go awry. So if the meeting agenda, you've had them in the past, be really clear. Like if it's going around, that's on the meeting facilitator. And I encourage you to have that conversation with the meeting. The other piece of that agenda is that meeting facilitator is actually saying, what's the outcome of the meeting? So, I used the example earlier of Harry and John, right? If Harry and John show up for that meeting, well, who's in control, Harry or John? What's the purpose of the meeting? Well, if Harry's in control, Harry, what's the purpose of the meeting? Why is John sitting here? So having that level of clarity of this is the desired outcome of the meeting, and what do we want to come away with? Actually, what do we need to talk about? So having a thought through, we need a couple of topics to talk through. And most importantly, and I think this might have come from, I saw from Britt in the chat earlier, what are the action items, the follow-ups that have to happen after the meeting? One of the worst things is not just having an ineffective meeting, but just having a meeting and nothing ever comes out from the meeting. There's no follow-up. There's no follow-through. So that's the other critical piece of that. What's the meeting? Who's facilitating? Who should be there? What's the desired outcome? What are the key agenda points? Place for notes and those key follow-up items. Put that agenda. We're in a digital age. Put that agenda on the meeting invite. You should be able to go to a meeting and see the agendas in the meeting invite or a link to a document that has the agenda. Everybody can look at it in advance of the meeting. It's in one place where it belongs with the meeting, with those kind of key components. So if those are missing, that's probably a good place to start with making those meetings more effective.
Yeah, Andy, I think you might have sort of addressed it, but the one other that I've gotten is around is the delegation. They're not having a problem with the meeting. It's exactly what we talked about. People not following through at the end of a meeting. How do I get my team to follow your time blocking methods?
Well, those are two different things. So I'm gonna address two different sides of those. So on delegation, there's two sides of delegation that are a challenge. So one, if you're a leader, are you delegating? And so you could be on the receiving end, someone's delegating to you, or you could be delegating. So I think this was in our newsletter three months ago, but we can send a link out to it again. It's our delegation agreement. So one of the key pieces, if you're going to delegate to something, is getting it out of your head, or if you're being delegated, is it clear what you're being delegated? So getting out of head what you're delegating, what do you see as the outcome? All too often, it's delegated in a quick comment versus actually getting it out in a specific concrete form. This is what I would like. We were internally talking about sending out gratitude cards for Thanksgiving. That's something that we've historically done every year. We've got a project going on. Are we going to do that this year? We're going to do something different. So it's on me. That's something I've delegated. But right now it's ambiguous. I need to go back and say, this is the outcome that I would like to have. I'd like our key clients that we've gone deeper with clients. I'd like for them to be engaged in a certain way. And these are some ways I could see them being engaged. Now what level am I delegating it? So do I want to know back, like, you're going to do this, this, or this, and I want to make a choice? Or am I fully delegating, saying, this is what I want, just do it and let me know when it's done? There's different levels and in our delegation agreement, there's 5 different levels that we talk about. That's something you need to be honest, because most leaders are not good at delegation. I'd rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10 at about a 4.8. I'm working on it. But those are the things that need to happen. You need to know where you are in terms of your progression on delegation, but the more you practice it and do it, the easier it gets. If you're on the receiving end, I'd ask those questions. What do you want? Like, I know you've given this to me, but I've got lots of questions. And you can use that delegation agreement and flip it around and ask those questions back to the person. You might be filling it out by asking questions that they haven't thought through. So just a closing comment as we're kind of drawing to a close. So here's what we want for you. We want you to feel like you're in your rightful place, back at the wheel, confidently making decisions no matter what life throws at you, and feeling in control.